All right, so continuing chapter 4. Number 8, the term for the title given to us, that's our status. And you can have achieved or ascribed. Achieved is something that you have achieved, that you have worked for, that you were not necessarily, you weren't born with. Ascribed is something that you didn't choose, that was ascribed, that was given to you. So, ascribed would be your race, your sex to a certain extent, maybe, well, ascribed would be if you are a widow or widower, so your status is the title, whereas the behaviors or the behavioral expectations that go along with that title is called a role. So my status is a professor. My role is to grade papers, lecture and so on. So I am going to include a link to the Stanford prison experiment, the Zimbardo prison experiment, that shows the power of status and roles. That just giving gentlemen these study participants, the status of being a corrections officer or an inmate, what impact that had on their behaviors. So I'll include a link to that. Number 9, the term for how we control the image others have of us, that's impression management. Impression management. We're forever managing the impression others have of us. We want to look good, to others, or sometimes we want to look like we're badass, or sometimes we want to look like, whatever we want to look like. We're forever managing the impression that others have of us. There's a term called dramaturgy. That means that we are actors. All of life is a stage, and we are forever acting out our statuses, our roles. That we're just actors. That I have been given the status of a professor, and now I'm constantly acting like a professor. So the term for how life is a stage and we are actors is called dramaturgy. Number 10, the term for how we are what we think others think we are is called looking glass self. It's Cooley's looking glass self. Looking glass is an old-fashioned term for mirror, looking glass. So even what I think I am, even my own impression, self-impression, comes from outside of myself, according to the looking glass self. All right. When I look out to a classroom and I see students and they are paying attention and they're raising their hand and they're getting involved in discussions, I'm like, oh, I am what I think you think I am. I am a good professor. Look, my students seem interested. I am what I think you think I am. Now, if I look out into a classroom and I see my students aren't paying attention, that their heads are down, they're falling asleep, they're yawning, then I think, oh, I'm not a very good instructor. Look, I am what I think they think I am. They look like they're bored. Oh, so I must be a bad instructor. When in reality, the students could be tired, or the room could be hot, and which is making them kind of sleepy. But according to Cooley's looking glass self, my self-impression comes from being mirrored back from others. So I am what I think you think I am. Have you ever told a joke and you're looking around and nobody's laughing? You're like, I am not funny. All right. I am what I think you think I am. Our perception of ourselves comes from what we think others think of us. Okay. Chapter 5 is socialization. And what socialization is all about, that we learn to get along in society when we learn our culture through socialization. We're shown and taught our ways, our norms, our language. We gain cultural capital through socialization. We are born essentially little animals. We just want to, eat and reproduce, essentially. But through our parents and our teachers and through socialization, we learn the correct ways to behave, the correct ways to speak, how to be successful, and so on. So if we have time in class, we will talk about Jeannie, this little girl, and we will debate, is she fully human or not? Because she lacks socialization. So we may come back to this. Number two, how do parents socialize their kids? They get them to adopt the same norms that they themselves follow. Example is that working class parents tend to expect obedience because their job requires it. So working class jobs tend to require, parents, people, working class professionals, to go in and clock in, get paid by the hour, listen to their boss, don't question authority. It's about obedience, it's about rules, and just do what you're told, all right? It's more working class type jobs. So parents, working class parents, will tend to really stress obedience with their kids because they think, hey, I'm preparing my kids for life. When in reality, sometimes that can be holding kids back, from maybe having a professional class job. Whereas professional class jobs today in the post-industrial age, professional class meaning like more, let's say, middle class to upper class, college educated type jobs, they stress leadership and creativity because their jobs require it. I know in my job, if I don't give my opinion, if I don't question things, then I'm not going to be looked upon as a really good employee. The expectation in my professional job is that I should be throwing out ideas that challenge the status quo, and say, hey, I have an idea, or this is, that I'm creative, that I think critically about stuff. Now, this is in opposition to kind of what my parents taught me. My parents were working class parents. And if I questioned their authority, or, tried to show that I'm creative and things, and they just wanted me to do what they said. And if I questioned them, they saw it as me being sassy, or I might get in trouble. Whereas professional class parents might see that as the questioning authority, wanting to do things in a little bit different of a way. They might see that as something that's good, that's setting them up for success, their kids up for success when they get older. So what you see is that parents tend to socialize their kids to accept the same norms that they've adopted, and that they've adopted for their jobs. Perhaps we'll talk about this a little bit more in class. Number three, how do schools socialize kids? Well, so schools, they teach facts and knowledge, spelling and math and so on, but they also teach a hidden curriculum, which is this how to interact with peers and authority, how to behave in groups and with one-on-one interaction. So, there's that whole math and science and that kind of curriculum, but there's also a hidden curriculum. All these messages that schools are teaching, like raise your hand, listen to the teacher, pledge of allegiance, teaching patriotism, stand in line, conformity. When you have spelling bees, let's say, that's about, teaching competition and winners and losers. So there's a hidden curriculum in schools. Schools don't just teach, facts and knowledge. They also socialize kids about, cultural capital. They teach kids on how to get along in society. Sometimes that hidden curriculum can work against us, and we'll talk about that when we get to the education chapter. If you don't have the cultural capital, the same kind of cultural capital as your teachers, that can work against you, but we'll talk about that again. So chapter 6 is looking at groups. Number 1, we need to have a shared understanding in order to interact. That's called intersubjectivity. And we'll do a little thing in class that will demonstrate intersubjectivity, all right? Intersubjectivity means that you understand, you have this same understanding as others so that you can talk to them. If you speak 2 different languages, you don't have intersubjectivity. If you come from 2 different cultures and you're talking about something that somebody else doesn't understand, you don't have intersubjectivity. If you're standing in a group and a bunch of people are talking about sports and you don't follow sports, you don't have intersubjectivity. We need to have a shared understanding of something in order to be able to interact in groups. So how do in-groups and out-groups affect interactions? Well, we feel connected to in-groups, and we tend to treat them better. And we tend to reject out-groups. We tend to treat them bad. So this may go back to our hunter-gathering days. where our in group was our tribe, and anybody outside of our tribe, we were, you know, they were our competition. They were taking our food, or maybe they were fighting us. So this in group, out group had survival. It helped us with survival. But today we're globalized, we're globalized citizens. We don't necessarily need to have these in group, out groups that we did in the past. But we still have them so much. We have in group, out groups right now, crazy in politics, don't we? We have in group, out groups with men versus women, and different races, in groups, out groups, right? We feel this connectedness to our in group, and maybe and the out group, we might feel like we might feel a little hesitant towards them. And so I'll link a video that will explain that a little bit more. A term for groups we compare ourselves to and hold in high esteem. That's called a reference group. So when we look at a group and we're like, oh, gee, I want to be like them, or you kind of look at them and you're like, all right, so this is how I need to dress, this is how I need to talk, this is, that's a reference group. That helps us to know if we want to be part of that group, we need to act this way. Number 4, society is becoming more focused on standardization and efficiency rather than in traditions and emotions. That's called McDonaldization. And I'll include a link to a little video on McDonaldization. Number 5, a group that is especially focused on standardization and efficiency. There's this division of labor, with some people doing this job and other people doing this job. There are written rules. There's a hierarchy of authority, who's the top dog and so on. Now, all this order and all this written rules and ways of doing things can make this organization, bureaucracy, kind of impersonal, and it lacks flexibility. So a bureaucracy can be good in that it can be efficient at times, and it can also maybe get rid of favoritism to a certain extent if there's written rules and so on, but it lacks flexibility. North Country Community College could be considered a bureaucracy. It's an organization that has a division of labor, right? You come and see your advisor, and then you have to go see financial aid, and then you have to go see another office to pay your bill. So this division of labor. There's a hierarchy of authority. So, there's professors, and then we have to answer to our department chair, and our department chair answers to academic affairs and so on. So sometimes North Country can lack flexibility because we have a certain way of doing things all the time, and sometimes it'd just be nice if there's exceptions, and as a small community college, we try to make exceptions, but we definitely still see all these characteristics of a bureaucracy. Here at North Country, you see it in the military, you see it in a lot of places. You hear about, bureaucracy, Okay, number 6, an experiment that showed we tend to conform to a group. That's the ASH experiment. This is the line experiment. I'll include a link to the ASH experiment. When I look at ASH, I kind of see the word ass. So this guy, and you'll see in the video, went along with the wrong answer that everybody gave because he didn't want to look like an ass, all right? He just conformed with the group. Even though he knew it was wrong, you could see it on his face, he just conformed with the group because he didn't want to look like an ass. So every time I see ash, I think of ass. Oh, conformity. He conformed. Yeah, because he didn't want to look like an ass. All right. Number 7, the experiment that showed we tend to obey authority, that's the Milgram shock experiment, and I'll include a link to that. Every time I see milligram, I kind of see milligram, and I think of science, and I think of wearing, like, the scientist wearing a lab coat, and how he says in the video, the scientist says, you must continue, you must continue, you must shock, you must shock the person, you must shock the person. So Milgram, I see milligrams, okay, science, okay, scientist, the lab coat there, yeah, and he's telling the person that you must continue for science, you must continue. All right. So that's the Milgram experiment. It's all about obedience to authority, and I'll include a link to the video for that. And we will go over the pictures in class at the bottom. All right.